Hey guys, it's me, Kari, and we're back with a new Storytime with Kari for 2022. And yes, this is the debut of my new short haircut. I got my haircut on Wednesday, and today is Tuesday, so just about a week ago. And I'm really loving it. I haven't had it this length in a few years. I'm going to probably play with it incessantly. I'll try not to, though, because it's distracting. This is also the first time in about 20 years that I haven't had highlights added. So you can see my dark roots growing back in up on top. I'm just going to go au naturel for a while and we'll see how it goes. Mostly financially motivated because I do love my highlights, but we'll see how it goes. But anyway, to the book. I was debating what I should read if I wanted to do another like YA type thing, like, you know, the Homecoming and Stacy song. If I wanted to do a more adult, in quotes, book, because I mean, that's all subjective really, you know. And I decided on one that I've loved forever. I adore the movie as well. But yeah, we're going to go with Girl Interrupted. So if you've not yet heard this book or read this book, I hope you guys will enjoy it. This is obviously the movie, you know, attached edition because it's got Winona Ryder as Susanna on the cover. It is a memoir written by Susanna Kaysen based on her time in a mental hospital. And I hope that you guys will enjoy it. It's definitely a meaningful book to me. Like I said, one that I've read many, many times. And I hope it will be enjoyable for you. So anyway, it was written in 1993. Wow. This book is almost 30 years old. That is mind-blowing. Literally mind-blowing. I had no idea. But anyway, yeah. And it is for Ingrid and Sanford. I like to share the dedications because I think that's important. Okay, the first page is a case record folder. I'm not going to be able to read this to you. I'm going to kind of hold it up like this so that hopefully you can read it if you wish. I don't know if you can pause it and read that, but just wanted to include that. There are no other photographs in the book. But I just, yeah, that's the only photograph type thing. But anyway, here we go. Okay. Toward a Topography of the Parallel Universe. That is the title of the first chapter. People ask, how did you get in there? What they really want to know is if they are likely to end up in there as well. I can't answer the real question. All I can tell them is it's easy. And it is easy to slip into a parallel universe. There are so many of them. Worlds of the insane, the criminal, the crippled, the dying, perhaps of the dead as well. These worlds exist alongside this world and resemble it, but are not in it. My roommate Georgina came in swiftly and totally during her junior year at Vassar. She was in a theater watching a movie when a tidal wave of blackness broke over her head. The entire world was obliterated for a few minutes. She knew she had gone crazy. She looked around the theater to see if it had happened to everyone, but all the other people were engrossed in the movie. She rushed out because the darkness in the theater was too much when combined with the darkness in her head. And after that, I asked her? A lot of darkness, she said. But most people pass over incrementally, making a series of perforations in the membrane between here and there until an opening exists. And who can resist an opening? In the parallel universe, the laws of physics are suspended. What goes up does not necessarily come down. A body at rest does not tend to stay at rest, and not every action can be counted on to provoke an equal and opposite reaction. Time, too, is different. It may run in circles, flow backward, skip about from now to then. The very arrangement of molecules is fluid. Tables can be clocks, faces, flowers. These are facts you find out later, though. Another odd feature of the parallel universe is that although it is invisible from this side, once you're in it, you can easily see the world where you came from. Sometimes the world you came from looks huge and menacing, quivering like a vast pile of jelly. At other times, it is miniaturized and alluring, a spinning and shining in its orbit. Either way, it can't be discounted. Every window on Alcatraz has a view of San Francisco. Chapter 2 is The Taxi. I'm not going to give you the numbers because I'm going to lose track of the numbers, but I'm just going to give you the titles of the chapters, and this one is called The Taxi. You have a pimple, said the doctor. I'd hoped nobody would notice. You've been picking it, he went on. When I'd woken that morning, early, so as to get this appointment, the pimple had reached the stage of hard expectancy in which it begs to be picked. It was yearning for release. Freeing it from its little white dome, pressing until the blood ran, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I'd done all that could be done for this pimple. "You've been picking at yourself," the doctor said. I nodded. He was going to keep talking about it until I agreed with him, so I nodded. "Have a boyfriend?" he asked. I nodded to this too. "Trouble with the boyfriend?" It wasn't a question, actually. He was already nodding for me. "Picking at yourself," he repeated. He popped out from behind his desk and lunged toward me. He was a taut, fat man, tight-bellied and dark. "You need a rest," he announced. I did need a rest, particularly since I'd gotten up so early that morning in order to see this doctor who lived out in the suburbs. I'd changed trains twice, and I would have to retrace my steps to get to my job. Just thinking of it made me tired. "Don't you think?" He was still standing in front of me. "Don't you think you need a rest?" "Yes," I said. He strode off to the adjacent room where I could hear him talking on the phone. I have thought often of the next 10 minutes, my last 10 minutes. I had the impulse once to get up and leave through the door I'd entered, to walk the several blocks to the trolley stop and wait for the train that would take me back to my troublesome boyfriend, my job at the kitchen store, but I was too tired. He strutted back into the room, busy, pleased with himself. "I've got a bed for you," he said. "It'll be a rest, just for a couple of weeks, okay?" He sounded conciliatory or pleading, and I was afraid. "I'll go Friday," I said. It was Tuesday. Maybe by Friday I wouldn't want to go. He bore down on me with his belly. "No, you go now." I thought this was unreasonable. "I have a lunch date," I said. "Forget it," he said. "You aren't going to lunch. You're going to the hospital." He looked triumphant. It was very quiet out in the suburbs before 8 in the morning, and neither of us had anything more to say. I heard the taxi pulling up the doctor's driveway. He took me by the elbow, pinched me between his large, stout fingers, and steered me outside. Keeping hold of my arm, he opened the back door of the taxi and pushed me in. His big head was in the back seat with me for a moment, then he slammed the door shut. The driver rolled his window down halfway. "Where to?" Coatless in the chilly morning, planted on his sturdy legs in his driveway, the doctor lifted one arm to point at me. "Take her to McLean," he said, "and don't let her out until you get there." I let my head fall back against the seat and shut my eyes. I was glad to be riding in a taxi instead of having to wait for the train. Okay, here's another actual photo, record, whatever, which again, I hope you'll be able to read. If not, it's not incredibly essential to the plot, as it will unfold and make all of this stuff clear, but if you want to read that, you can, hopefully. Okay, oh, there's another one. Okay, inter-office memorandum from her intake. I don't know if these are actual documents of Susanna's. They may very well be, which is kind of fascinating. It was June 15th, 1967 was the date of that inter-office memo. Okay, I think we'll do one more chapter, depending on the length, because they're pretty short. We'll see how long we can go. This chapter is called Etiology. This person is, in parentheses, pick one. 1. On a perilous journey from which we can learn much when he or she returns. 2. Possessed by, pick one. A. The gods. B. God, capitalized. That is, a prophet. C. Some bad spirits, demons, or devils. D. The devil, capital D. 3. A witch. 4. Bewitched, a variant of number 2. 5. Bad and must be isolated and punished. 6. Ill and must be isolated and treated by, in parentheses, pick one. A. Purging and leeches. This was our medical system at one point. B. Removing the uterus if the person has one. C. Electric shock to the brain. D. Cold sheets wrapped tight around the body. E. Thorazine or stelazine. 7. Ill and must spend the next 7 years talking about it. 8. A victim of society's low tolerance for deviant behavior. 9. Sane in an insane world. 10. On a perilous journey from which he or she may never return. Okay, next chapter, Fire. One girl among us had set herself on fire. She used gasoline. She was too young to drive at the time. I wondered how she'd gotten hold of it. Had she walked to her neighborhood garage and told them her father's car had run out of gas? I couldn't look at her without thinking about it. I think the gasoline had settled in her collarbones, forming pools there beside her shoulders, because her neck and cheeks were scarred the most. The scars were thick ridges, alternating bright pink and white in stripes up from her neck. They were so tough and wide that she couldn't turn her head, but had to swivel her entire upper torso if she wanted to see a person standing next to her. Scar tissue has no character. It's not like skin. It doesn't show age or illness or pallor or tan. It has no pores, no hair, no wrinkles. It's like a slipcover. It shields and disguises what's beneath. That's why we grow it. We have something to hide. Her name was Polly. This name must have seemed ridiculous to her in the days or months when she was planning to set herself on fire, but it suited her well in her slip-covered survivor life. She was never unhappy. She was kind and comforting to those who were unhappy. She never complained. She always had time to listen to other people's complaints. She was faultless in her impermeable tight pink and white casing. Whatever had driven her whispered "die" in her once perfect, now scarred ear. She had immolated it. Why did she do it? Nobody knew. Nobody dared to ask. Because what courage? Who had the courage to burn herself? 20 aspirin, a little slit alongside the veins of the arm, maybe even a bad half hour standing on a roof. We've all had those. And somewhat more dangerous things like putting a gun in your mouth. But you put it there, you taste it. It's cold and greasy, your fingers on the trigger, and you find that whole world lies between this moment and the moment you've been planning, when you'll pull the trigger. That world defeats you. You put the gun back in the drawer. You have to find another way. What was that moment like for her? The moment she lit the match. Had she already tried roofs and guns and aspirin? Or was it just an inspiration? I had an inspiration once. I woke up one morning and I knew that today I had to swallow 50 aspirin. It was my task, my job for the day. I lined them up on my desk and took them one by one, counting. But it's not the same as what she did. I could have stopped at 10 or at 30, and I could have done what I did do, which was go on to the street and faint. 50 aspirin is a lot of aspirin, but going onto the street and fainting is like putting the gun back in the drawer. She lit the match. Where? In the garage at home, where she wouldn't set anything else on fire? Out in a field? In the high school gym? In an empty swimming pool? Somebody found her, but not for a while. Who would kiss a person like that? A person with no skin? She was 18 before this thought occurred to her. She'd spent a year with us. Other people stormed and screamed and cringed and cried. Polly watched and smiled. She sat by people who were frightened, and her presence calmed them. Her smile wasn't mean, it was understanding. Life was hellish, she knew that. But her smile hinted she'd burned all that out of her. Her smile was a little bit superior. We wouldn't have the courage to burn it out of ourselves. But she understood that too. Everyone was different. People just did what they could. One morning, somebody was crying, but mornings were often noisy. Fights about getting up on time and complaints about nightmares. Polly was so quiet, so unobtrusive a presence that we didn't notice she wasn't at breakfast. After breakfast, we could still hear crying. Who's crying? Nobody knew. And at lunch, there was still crying. It's Polly, said Lisa, who knew everything. Why? But even Lisa didn't know why. At dusk, the crying changed to screaming. Dusk is a dangerous time. At first, she screamed, "Ah!" and "ee!" Then she started to scream words. "My face! My face! My face!" We could hear other voices shushing her, murmuring comfort, but she continued to scream her 2 words long into the night. Lisa said, "Well, I've been expecting this for a while." And then I think we all realized what fools we'd been. We might get out sometime, but she was locked up forever in that body. Okay, I think we can do one more chapter. This one's called Freedom. Lisa had run away again. We were sad because she kept our spirits up. She was funny. Lisa. I can't think of her without smiling even now. The worst was that she was always caught and dragged back, dirty, with wild eyes that had seen freedom. She would curse her captors, and even the tough old-timers had to laugh at the names she made up. "Cheese pussy," and another favorite, "You schizophrenic bat." Usually they found her within a day. She couldn't get far on foot with no money, but this time she seemed to have lucked out. On the 3rd day, I heard someone in the nursing station saying APB into the phone, All Points Bulletin. Lisa wouldn't be hard to identify. She rarely ate and she never slept, so she was thin and yellow, the way people get when they don't eat. And she had huge bags under her eyes. She had long, dark, dull hair that she fastened with a silver clip. She had the longest fingers I've ever seen. This time when they brought her back, they were almost as angry as she was. 2 big men had her arms, and a third guy had her by the hair, pulling so that Lisa's eyes bugged out. Everybody was quiet, including Lisa. They took her down to the end of the hall to seclusion while we watched. We watched a lot of things. We watched Cynthia come back crying from electroshock once a week. We watched Polly shiver after being wrapped in ice-cold sheets. One of the worst things we watched, though, was Lisa coming out of seclusion 2 days later. To begin with, they'd cut her nails down to the quick. She'd had beautiful nails, which she worked on, polishing, shaping, buffing. They said her nails were, quote, sharps. And they'd taken away her belts. Lisa always wore cheap beaded belts, the kind made by Indians on reservations. It was green with red triangles on it, and had belonged to her brother Jonas, the only one in her family still in touch with her. Her mother and father wouldn't visit her because she was a sociopath, or so said Lisa. They took away the belt so she couldn't hang herself. They didn't understand that Lisa would never hang herself. They let her out of seclusion, and they gave her back her belt, and her nails started to grow in again, but Lisa didn't come back. She just sat and watched TV with the worst of us. Lisa had never watched TV. She'd had nothing but scorn for those who did. It's shit, she'd yell, sticking her head into the TV room. You're already like robots. It's making you worse. Sometimes she turned off the TV and stood in front of it, daring somebody to turn it on. But the TV audience was mostly catatonics and depressives, who were disinclined to move. After 5 minutes, which was about as long as she could stand still, Lisa would be off on another project, and when the person on checks came around, she would turn the TV on again. Since Lisa hadn't slept for the 2 years she'd been with us, the nurses had given up telling her to go to bed. Instead, she had a chair of her own in the hallway, just like the night staff, where she'd sit and work on her nails. She made wonderful cocoa, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, she made cocoa for the night staff and anybody else who was up. She was calmer at night. Once I asked her, Lisa, how come you don't rush around and yell at night? I need rest too, she said. Just because I don't sleep doesn't mean I don't rest. Lisa always knew what she needed. She'd say, I need a vacation from this place, and then she'd run away. When she got back, we'd ask her how it was out there. It's a mean world, she'd say. She was usually glad enough to be back. There's nobody to take care of you out there. Now she said nothing. She spent all her time in the TV room. She watched prayers and test patterns and hours of late-night talk shows and early morning news. Her chair in the hall was unoccupied, and nobody got cocoa. Are you giving Lisa something? I asked the person on checks. You know we can't discuss medication with patients. I asked the head nurse. I'd known her a while, since before she was the head nurse, but she acted as though she'd always been the head nurse. We can't discuss medications, you know that. Why bother asking, said Georgina. She's completely blotto. Of course they're giving her something. Cynthia didn't think so. She still walks okay, she said. I don't, said Polly. She didn't. She walked with her arms stuck out in front of her, her red and white hands drooping from her wrists and her feet shuffling along the floor. The cold packs hadn't worked. She still screamed all night until they put her on something. It took a while, I said. You walked okay when they started it. Now I don't, Polly said. She looked at her hands. I asked Lisa if they were giving her something, but she wouldn't look at me. And this way we all passed through a month or two, Lisa and the catatonics in the TV room. Polly walking like a motorized corpse, Cynthia crying after electroshock. I'm not sad, she explained to me, but I can't help crying. And me and Georgina in our double suite, we were considered the healthiest. When spring came, Lisa began spending a little more time outside the TV room. She spent it in the bathroom, to be exact, but at least it was a change. I asked the person on checks, what's she doing in the bathroom? This was a new person. Am I supposed to open bathroom doors, too? I did what we often did to new people. Somebody could hang herself in there in a minute. Where do you think you are, anyhow, a boarding school? Then I put my face close to hers. They didn't like that, touching us. I noticed Lisa went to a different bathroom every time. There were 4, and she made the circuit daily. She didn't look good. Her belt was hanging off her, and she looked yellower than usual. Maybe she's got dysentery, I said to Georgina. But Georgina thought she was just blotto. One morning in May, we were eating breakfast when we heard a door slam. Then Lisa appeared in the kitchen. Later for that TV, she said. She poured herself a big cup of coffee, just as she used to do in the mornings, and sat down at the table. She smiled at us, and we smiled back. Wait, she said. We heard feet running and voices saying things like, what in the world? And how in the world? Then the head nurse came into the kitchen. You did this, she said to Lisa. We went to see what it was. She had wrapped all the furniture, some of it holding catatonics, and the TV, and the sprinkler system on the ceiling, in toilet paper. Yards and yards of it floated and dangled, bunched and draped on everything, everywhere. It was magnificent. She wasn't blotto, I said to Georgina. She was plotting. We had a good summer, and Lisa told us lots of stories about what she'd done in those 3 days she was free. All right, guys, we're going to stop there for now. I hope you will enjoy this book as much as I do. I haven't reread it in a couple years, so this will be as much fun for me as for you, hopefully. I've actually seen the movie a lot more than I've read the book, and there are definitely some pretty large contrasts, things in different sequences, and, you know, elaborated more on either in the book or in the film. So if you've not experienced either one of them, I hope this is like a really great experience for you. And if you have, I hope you'll enjoy it too. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll be back soon with more stuff. Bye, guys.